Today's youth need teachers, volunteers, and most of all, well, they need you. I'm Doug Edwards, and I'm going to be talking with real youth mentors and students to give you the knowledge you need to be the best youth worker possible. This is Youth Worker on Fire. Talking about working hard, and if you're in student ministry in any way, you're working hard. I always said if you're considered a part-time volunteer youth pastor, there's no such thing as part-time or even volunteer. You're probably investing in yourself and having to pay if you're a volunteer. If you're a part-time youth pastor, you're still working full-time because your heart is with students. And if you're full-time, can overtime all the time. So if that makes sense to you, if you're in, you do understand what I'm saying. If you're thinking about getting into student ministry or you're working with other people that are in, you'll start to look at them differently after listening to some of this. Heard a strange comparison the other day on a work podcast or a investors, that sort of thing. This one gal, Cody Sanchez, just has some great quotes that trigger me sometimes on what happens in ministry. I'm not trying to say she's a spiritual person or whatever. She just does really good in the areas that she works in. But she said, millionaires say to make millions, you have to what? She'll ask her audience and they'll say, work. She'll say, that's true. But billionaires, she said, when you ask them, they say, well, I really work lazily. And that's how I make a lot of money. And she explains that. And some people say, well, that's not what they mean exactly. Well, to some degree, they do. She said they would say, I have to think about what I can create for me and that I hardly have to work at. Now, that wasn't in great detail, but it triggered my thoughts concerning student ministry. It made me think, as pastors or youth pastors, we either follow Jesus' example, follow the professional route in ministry, which a lot of times we're hired to be the person, to be this main speaker that just inspires the entire world, makes all the programs happen. We look at that professional route. We make disciples, especially in student ministry, which we should be, and we teach them to know how to do what is necessary to change the world. Fields in a youth pastor conference said that even though he had 2,000 students in his high school program at Saddleback Church, some of us in smaller churches were actually running a higher percentage of students than he was. His church was running over 25,000 people at that time, and later the church would run over 100,000 people. I think it's even more than that now, because they learned to multiply through multiple sites and also created something called home church concept. And that home church concept was a God concept, a Jesus concept. Before Constantine came into the picture, according to Lance Kramer, a few episodes back, who was our Eskimo pastor up above the Arctic Circle, he said that Constantine came in and said, why are you guys working so hard and doing all your churches and homes? Why don't you just let us help you build church buildings? You can all meet there. We'll hire professional people to come and pastor you and do different things like that. And so the church was growing by leaps and bounds until that happened. I thought that was an interesting point. So I did a lot with student ministry over many, many years. I did a lot of student ministry at our church that was much smaller than Saddleback. It took a lot of volunteers, full-time secretary, which I shared with the rest of the staff at the church, to get a mountain of programs, trips, mission trips, discipleship programs on 3 separate levels of adolescence, regular retreats, and national conferences. We also did programs for a lot of public and middle school and high schoolers, or high schools, and the public and middle school, high schools did programs for them to get ourselves involved. That enhanced them, but we did it strategically so we could reach students for Jesus Christ and teachers and families, and some college levels as well. Had I had a better mind concept, could have done even more, and so can you. That's why I'm saying all this. You can do more. but you've got to work smarter, not harder. You've heard that phrase a lot. It's absolutely true. I believe it's a Jesus model. When we disciple and delegate to great volunteers or hire more staff, God can do more. What if we could get that Jesus concept of disciple making and delegating to people so our students can tell his story and teach others to do the same? I know there are many programs doing this, but I also know many churches and organizations that are not. This is exactly how Jesus ministered. The clearest passage is Ephesians 4:12 are the gifts Christ gave to the church, pastors and teachers. Their responsibility is to equip God's people to do his work and build up the church, the body of Christ. That's from the New Living Testament. That is the entire philosophy of ministry. The pastor's primary job is not to do all the ministry. The pastor's primary job is to equip to do ministry. And if you've heard me quote or other people talk about pastors and youth workers, the students would sometimes say to them, we're doing all the work. You're not doing any work. He said, that's my job. My job is help you to learn how to work, not to do all the work. So Jesus' ministry strategy was Mark 13 through 15. Jesus could have preached to crowds every day. Instead, he intentionally chose 12. He also invested in 500, I'll remind you, but he more strategically invested in Peter of the three. Specifically, he was the one, called him the foundation, the rock of the church. He invested deeply in a few so they could reach many. Jesus was thinking multiplication. Paul's ministry formula was 2 Timothy 2:2. He's writing to Timothy, who he was mentoring. Paul says, teach these truths to other trustworthy people who will be able to pass them. Notice the 4 generations, Paul, Timothy, faithful people, others. Jesus' final assignment, Matthew 28:19 through 20, was Jesus never said, build the biggest youth ministry. He said, disciple or make disciples. Programs are wonderful. Disciple making is the mission. I know we've said these things over and over again. I'm hoping to say them in a way that maybe is more engaging to you, is what's happening here. If you disappear for 6 months, would your ministry stop? Continue because you've developed disciple makers. That question gets to the heart of multiplication. I'll tell you this, when I was going on sabbaticals, the first sabbatical I went on, I'm going, what are you talking about? I'm so busy. It had been 5 years in because you got a sabbatical after you'd been there 5 years. I said, I'm just too busy. I've got too much to do. We're at the peak of, they said, doesn't matter. Your job description is at this time, you're taking 3 months off. You're on sabbatical. That is not a request. It is a job description. Got my volunteers together and said, here's where I'm going to be. I'm not going to be available. You're going to have to carry this. And at the end of this, I'll be back and we'll continue on. So it forced me into delegating things that it was taking me way too long to delegate. It forced me to put myself in a position of rest. Working harder may increase what I can accomplish or you can accomplish, but equipping others increases what God can accomplish through his people. Jesus didn't build a ministry that depended on him staying physically present forever. He built disciples who could carry his mission to the end of the earth. That's our calling, to become indispensable. And that's, why do we feel that way? It's job security. Some people say, well, that's not a God concept. Because it makes us feel like we're important, not our job description by God's design. There's so much work to do. So Jesus made disciples to lead, serve, and multiply. And that's what you're doing. That's what you're all about. Delegation isn't just about growth. It's also about obedience and sustainable ministry. See you next time on Youth Worker on Fire.
You've been listening to the Youth Worker on Fire podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and tell your friends. Also, leave a comment and tell us what you think. Stay tuned for more informative episodes.